You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today we are taking a look at the AFC West offenses and ranking them from worst to first, 4 through 1. I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts on the AFC West. How do you think these offenses are shaping up as we head into the 2024 NFL season? Where would you rank all these teams? What are your opinions on my rankings? But we're going to dive in. We'll break these teams down. We'll go over the signings, some of the changes to the offenses, however things have kind of shifted around because of losses and whatnot. But starting off with the number 4 team, beginning at the bottom. I took some time to really sit on this one here, and the way I look at this division kind of like 4-3, and then there's 2-1, but that's even kind of a little bit of a stretch. But when you look at 4-3, I definitely think there's a lot of conversation we have, and you could maybe lump who I have at number 2 into this group as well here, depending on how you feel about things. But for right now, settling in at number 4, after a lot of consideration, I decided that I was going to go with the Denver Broncos here. Now, coming into this season, you have obviously Sean Payton's scheme working with Joe Lombardi for the second year now. It's a new era again here in Denver with the post-Russell Wilson era, as you now have a quarterback battle going on between Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson, who came over from New York this past offseason. The hope is that whoever takes over at quarterback is going to be able to handle what is typically a very pass-heavy style of offense from Sean Payton, and also get along with Sean Payton. I think that is going to be an important piece to this whole puzzle here, because obviously the drama and just kind of the issues or whatever it may have been between Russell Wilson and Sean Payton clearly was not meshing, it was not working, and I think is kind of what inhibited this offense from really reaching its potential. On top of that, obviously some other injuries and things as well, but the Russell Wilson-Sean Payton thing was a bit of an issue. This was like an average to slightly below average offense last year, depending on the time of season that you were looking at, and there really isn't a ton of changes as far as this entire offense is in totality when you look at what they were last year going into this year. Obviously, the big change being there's going to be a new quarterback here. It's just a matter of who's taking those reps on day number 1 of the regular season in week 1. But beyond that, it's a very familiar team to last year, and I do think that there is some good with that, and then the additions that were made will obviously kind of dictate whether this offense ends up being maybe a little bit better or a little bit worse here. Obviously, you have the first-round pick for Bo Nix. Fun to watch in week 1 of the preseason just this past week. His 5-year college quarterback. A lot of people knock him for having spent as long as he did in college as a quarterback here, and in my opinion, it kind of makes it easy for me to root for him, because I love seeing a guy who comes in, has all the doubters surrounding him, and just knocking him for having spent so much time, in the whole conversation of, well, he better be ready because he spent 5 years cooking in the collegiate leagues. That's fine and dandy, but I'm kind of pulling for him because of that. It makes me want to see him succeed because of all the doubters. And I mean, you look at what he did in 2023, 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. His completion percentage was 77.5%. Like, this guy was nails last season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him progress, and I'm hoping he can win the QB1 job going into his rookie season here. I want to see the offense just get rolling with him. I know Jarrett Stidham and company are there kind of battling it out as well, but I'm rooting for Bo Nix there. You have wide receiver Josh Reynolds, who's coming in as well. A nice addition to the wide receiver room, and it looks like he could see some decent amount of action coming in here. He had 40 receptions, 600 yards, averaged about 15 yards per reception last season, so definitely keeping an eye on him. They also went and drafted a wide receiver from Oregon, a guy that Bo Nix is very familiar with here in 4th-round pick Troy Franklin. I think that's one of those things, and I talked about this after the fact of the draft when it happened. I like the idea of bringing in a guy that a quarterback worked with while he was in college, because it just adds a little bit of comfort to him coming into an entirely new system with, all the pressure on him being a first-round pick in a team that needs a quarterback. So I really like the idea of bringing a guy like Troy Franklin in, and when you look at his career progression while he was at Oregon those last 3 seasons, you could see a steady increase in the numbers, so it looked like he was getting better year over year over year with more opportunity. So I'm excited to see how he kind of carves out a role for him. Even if he's not considered to be like a starting guy, he's probably someone who's going to see some time, and if that connection holds over from Oregon to the Denver Broncos, we might see him sooner rather than later eating up snaps. You also have wide receiver Tim Patrick, who is kind of a wild card here, because Tim Patrick, for what it's worth, a couple of seasons ago, before injuries just knocked him out the last 2 years back to back, is going to get an opportunity to recapture form and be a contributor on this offense here. For those of you that are not Broncos fans who may not remember Tim Patrick, he earned himself a pretty nice payday following what was a pretty productive few years for Denver, and then ultimately going down with the injury the last couple of years has derailed everything. But it sounds like the reviews he's been getting out of training camp have been really good. He's excited to be back and healthy and finally be able to catch a pass for the first time from a quarterback in what feels like 2 years. I'm excited to see what Tim Patrick can do here. I'm hoping that the injuries didn't completely, wipe out the talent that we were seeing start to blossom for him just a few years ago, but I am expecting for him to be able to come back in and at least be a contributor for this offense. You did have a big change at the center position as well. I do think that this is important to note here as Lloyd Cushenberry departed from the team this offseason. So you're looking at a bit of a battle between Luke Wattenberg, Alex Forsythe, and Sam Mustipher. I'm assuming, based off what the depth charts are saying as well and what we've kind of seen, Luke Wattenberg has the leg up as far as the starting center here. But overall, the rest of the O-line is a group that played pretty much all of last season together. Denver was one of those teams that had a fairly healthy season as far as offensive linemen go. So outside of the change at center here, which is a key piece to the offensive line, I can't really stress that importance enough. But, outside of that, you're going to have an offensive line that has a lot of consistency, having spent so much time, and they were all, again, very healthy last season as well. So you're getting a whole year of these guys being together now. You have a change at center. Hopefully that works out well. But this is a team that I'll be keeping an eye on. I don't really know where it's going to go, in large part because of what the quarterback situation looks like right now. I like the talent you have in Denver. The running back room is a fun one to look at as well. Like when you're looking at the guys they have there with Javonte Williams, who's exploded at certain times. Jaleel McLaughlin's one of those guys that's, he's been a contributor during the time that he's been in Denver. You have a 5th round draft pick in Audric Estime as well. So, and then Samaje Perine, someone they brought in. There's definitely a lot to look forward to with Denver overall. I'm curious how the tight end position kind of works itself out between like Greg Dulcich and Adam Troutman. But overall, I like the potential that Denver has. It's just a matter of how well is Bo Nix going to play as a rookie if he winds up getting the job, or if it's not him out of the gates and it's someone like Jarrett Stidham, or if in some, upside down universe, Zach Wilson winds up being the starter day one. How do they look as quarterback here? I think having a solid core of guys around them is good, but there is definitely a lot of uncertainty about the quarterback room at this moment. I think Bo Nix will be a pretty solid guy. I think based off what we saw from preseason week 1, and it wasn't perfect by any means, but it was definitely entertaining and fun to watch. There are like some things that if you dive into the weeds, you can like pick out and kind of complain about with what Bo Nix did. But overall, I would say the overall product of what he put on the field was solid and good to watch for a guy in his first game action in the NFL. But overall, I'm looking forward to seeing what Denver does. But right now, I'll put him at number 4, as I'm just a little bit uncertain as to what this is going to look like as we go into this new era post Russell Wilson now. Moving into the number 3 spot, and again, I looked at this division as kind of like 3 and 4, and then you have 2 and 1, and there was a lot of consideration about who I was going to put at 2 and 3, but that was when I initially went into this, and then the more I started looking at things, the more I kind of started talking myself out of this team being a number 2 contender, and I went with the Chargers at number 3. Now, prior to me sitting down and putting together these rankings, I initially sat down with the idea that I was going to have the Chargers at number 2. But the more I kind of looked at stuff, the changes and just the expectations, and now what's kind of gone on the last week or so with the Chargers as well, I'm a little less high on them than I was a week or so ago, but I do still think that if all goes well, the ceiling for the Chargers can be really high. But right now, I feel like they're closer to potentially their floor than they are their ceiling, with just the ugliness that we've seen. The plantar fascia injury that Justin Herbert is dealing with now has got to be one of the worst things that you could have possibly happened. With a new head coach coming in, new offensive coordinator, you want him out there taking those snaps and getting as much time to learn this new system as possible, not only mentally, but physically being involved in everything as well. this plantar fascia injury is going to screw some things up. There's no real way around that. You can't sit here and tell me that it's not going to be a non-factor. Like, I like Justin Herbert. I think he's amongst the top quarterbacks in the NFL. He's paid like one for a reason. But you combine that with, again, new head coach, new offensive system. You couple that with all your skill groups were gutted in some capacity this past offseason. There is plenty of questions about Los Angeles going into this 2024 season. And while I'm sitting here and I probably sound a little more negative about Los Angeles than I did about Denver, but I still have them ahead of Denver, I do still think that Justin Herbert will be okay, but it's going to slow things down initially for this offense here. But again, you have your franchise guy, albeit he's hurt, but you have your franchise guy, and that's something that Denver doesn't have. And in this league, the way it is set up right now, if you have a franchise quarterback, you're better off than most teams that maybe have some better talent in other position groups on the offensive side of the football here. So that's partially why I'm kind of airing Chargers over Broncos, even though I'm probably talking a little more negatively about the Chargers right now than I did the Broncos. When you look at the changes and additions, though, again, a lot of changing going on here. We watched the departure of Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler. Like, there's a whole changing of the guard, essentially, as far as skill players go in Los Angeles. It is definitely a new era in LA as well, minus like Justin Herbert being the same guy with the similar offensive line. But you look at tight ends, Will Disley, Hayden Hurst coming in here. Disley sounds like he's going to be the guy at tight end for them, and while he hasn't necessarily lit the world on fire as a receiver, he has had some flashes here and there. He's more of a blocking tight end kind of guy anyways, and he's going to fit what is going to be a more balanced offense that Jim Harbaugh is looking to kind of hammer home. And honestly, with this injury to Justin Herbert, depending on how long it takes for him to get back to 100%, he might need to really hammer the run game in. So getting a guy like Will Disley, blocking tight end style of guy, makes a lot of sense for why he was brought in for the money that he was brought in for. He was the biggest ticket free agent there. You also look at your running back room getting some changes as well. You brought in two running backs from Baltimore in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Edwards having a really good season last year, probably his best so far of his career, 800 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground. And you have someone in J.K. Dobbins who, you go back to like 2020 and he looked great, but since then he has just had his career kind of derailed by injuries. But if he can recapture even some of the form and be effective as like a 1-2 punch with Gus Edwards, I do think he could fill that role of he's the more elusive guy, the guy you're probably throwing to out of the backfield, whereas Gus Edwards, he's going to be the bust that he is, Gus the bust. So I'm just curious as to like what J.K. Dobbins is able to do post all these injuries. Does he actually stay healthy, and where does he go during this season behind Edwards? Because I'm assuming Edwards gets the number one role. Your wide receiver room, obviously getting some changes here. You bring in DJ Chark, tall and fast guy, someone that you might not even remember this, but if you know of DJ Chark and what he was doing in Jacksonville, you go back to 2019, he was a 1,000-yard receiver. I mean, and he's got the speed, he's got the size, and when he was heavily involved in that Jacksonville offense, he did put up numbers. So I'm curious to see just how much goes his way this season with Justin Herbert here. He is taking on a starting role alongside Joshua Palmer, and of course, the wide receiver that they took in this year's draft in the second round in Ladd McConkey, who's going to be manning the slot alongside Palmer and the aforementioned DJ Chark. But overall, there was a lot of addressing and a lot of changing that needed to go on, and I do think that the Chargers did a very good job of addressing that. And then beyond just the Ladd McConkey draftee, you also have yourself a right tackle in Joel Alt, who's coming in, and in my opinion, one of the best picks in the draft, one of the most surefire picks. This is someone that I'll be kind of shocked if Joe Alt doesn't come in, have at least like a 10-year career, and then retire as a potential Hall of Fame guy. He just feels like one of those people that is one of the most sure bets coming out of this year's draft, and I've thought that about him for quite some time. So great selection there in round number one. Some of the other skill guys you added as well in the later rounds, curious to see how they work out here. You have Kamani Vidal, the running back. He's coming out, 24 rushing touchdowns his last two seasons at Troy. You have Brendan Rice, the son of Jerry Rice, about 800 yards, 12 touchdowns, 17.5 yards per reception last season. You have another 7th-round wide receiver in Cornelius Johnson as well, who had solid production while he was in college. A lot of things as far as Los Angeles goes is really going to come down to Justin Herbert and how quickly he gets back, and if this plantar fascia injury really messes him up this season. I genuinely hope it does not. I'm hoping for the best on this, but if he wasn't hurt, I would maybe have been more comfortable putting them at number 2, but with his injury and just, again, there's so much changing going on in LA right now. I feel like Herbert mitigates that, but he's got to be healthy and be playing for it to actually matter here. So I'm hoping that this doesn't mess things up for the Chargers this year. And I think best case scenario, it maybe slows things down in the early portion of the season for LA, but maybe once Herbert's healthy and they get back into the swing of things and he's able to work with these guys and actually get the reps in that he needs to be getting to learn this offense, not only mentally, but also physically as well. I think this is an offense that can be fun to watch. I don't necessarily know if they're going to be like top of the NFL, but they could definitely be finding themselves maybe in the top half of the league just because they have a guy like Justin Herbert. And I do think when I know with what Jim Harbaugh can do, I think Luke Getsy will do a good job with him as well to build out a nice balanced offense for them. I'm expecting a lot of good things here. I'm high on Harbaugh. I'm high on Herbert, but just situation currently right now has kind of scared me a little bit on the stock of the Chargers. Moving into the number 2 spot here as we get closer to that number 1. After much consideration, unfortunately, Raiders fans, I don't know how I couldn't put Kansas City at number 1, so I had to sit you at number 2 here. I do think that, you could argue there is a lot to be excited about with the Raiders, and for me personally, I am really looking forward to seeing what this team does post all the Josh McDaniels stuff from last year, as that is now completely in the rearview mirror as it is a new season. Antonio Pierce is the head coach now going forward. On top of that, and I know I said I need to fix this because this has been sitting in the back of my mind. I know I said Luke Getsy for the Chargers. It is Greg Roman who's going to be the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. Luke Getsy's for the Raiders. I'm sorry. I'm like jumbling names and coordinators here. Luke Getsy is the offensive coordinator for the Raiders, and Greg Roman is working for the Chargers. But again, point being that it's a new era in Las Vegas. You have Antonio Pierce and Luke Getsy now running things as far as the offensive side is concerned here. There has been some decent changes going on for the Raiders as well here. Jimmy Garoppolo is obviously gone. You have a quarterback battle going on as well. Josh Jacobs, your lead running back for the last few years, he is gone as well. There's some interesting additions added to this offense via the draft. There's a lot to be excited about here, but the biggest question mark really is going to come down to what does quarterback look like? And listen, I'm a Colts fan, so I have the utmost respect for Gardner Minshew because I was watching what he was doing in Jacksonville before he found himself in Indianapolis down the road years later. But knowing what Gardner Minshew brings to the table, and he earned himself an opportunity to compete for a starting job this year, in my opinion, with what he did last year, nearly taking the Colts to the playoffs under Shane Steichen's offense over there with Jim Bob Cooter. I am curious to see if he can hang on to that starting job, and if he does, what exactly goes on here, because it's between him and Aiden O'Connell right now. And if Minshew lands the starting role, it's one of those things where everyone else on the outside looking at Las Vegas is like, wow, their quarterback is Gardner Minshew. And again, Colts fan here, I didn't expect a lot from Minshew once Anthony Richardson went down, even though I did know what he was doing during his time in Jacksonville. But he has earned my respect, and if he's the starting quarterback, he is not going to necessarily lose you games, but he'll, as long as things are going smoothly on offense, keep you in games. I'm not going to sit here and say he will win you games, but he's definitely not going to lose you games. And you have enough talent on offense right now. When you look at the wide receiver room, you of course have Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams. There is a lot to be excited about with what is brewing in Las Vegas. As far as the additions go beyond Gardner Minshew, though, you bring in a burner like Jalen Guyton from the Chargers himself, he hasn't done a ton the last couple of years, but in 2020 to 2021 showed that, the burner that he can be, and if you focus in on him a little bit more on the offense, he can open up the top of the defenses a little bit here. You added running back Alexander Mattison, who right now is slated to be the guy behind Zamir White. So Mattison, 800 to almost 900 yards last season total altogether between rushing and receiving. He had 3 touchdowns as well. Good depth, but I'm expecting that Zamir White's probably going to be carrying the load now in the post-Josh Jacobs era. And you spent some early draft picks as well on offense. In the first round, of course, going after tight end Brock Bowers. You're going to pair him with tight end Michael Mayer. You have a second-round selection in offensive lineman Jackson Powers-Johnson, who looks like he's going to be slated for the left guard spot. And then, of course, in round number 6, you got a running back in Dylan Lobb as well. You have some other offensive line pieces as well that you were adding. Third-round selection in right tackle DJ Glaze. And then some big names here, some notable guys who spent some decent amount of time starting in their career here as depth. You have right tackle Andres Pete. You have offensive guard Cody Whitehair. So some decent guys that you're adding to deepen the things on the offensive line. I'm really excited to see what this offense looks like here because it right now, the way I envision the Raiders, if they're going to really run this 2 tight end system, is it's going to be a lot of maybe like single back stuff. Yeah, you'll do shotgun as well, but you're probably going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets here. I want to see Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers running on the field together at the same time, just terrorizing guys over the middle, while you have Jacoby Myers, who he can't play outside, but if he's in the slot, wherever you need to put him, like, you can make that work. And then of course you have Devontae Adams on the outside, wherever, you want to line him up as the guy for your offense here. But I'm hoping to see them try to do similar to like what the 2010s Patriots were doing in that 2 tight end stuff. You have the talent in 2 of like the best tight ends to come out of the last couple of drafts in Michael Mayer and in Brock Bowers now, that you can really challenge some of these linebackers and some of the safeties that play inside the box and really see what they're made of with these 2 guys over the middle here. And I'm really hoping that that's kind of the direction that this offense goes here. A lot of it, again, comes down to who ends up being quarterback and what this team ends up looking like going forward. But the back half of last season, the Raiders were an exciting group, and a lot of that had to do with Antonio Pierce coming in, the players loving him, buying into what he's doing over there as a head coach. And I think we're going to see more of that continue to snowball in a positive direction for the Raiders here. If they really try to challenge, but again, defenses have evolved as of late to get a little bit smaller, get a little bit faster. If the Raiders want to come in here and run these big 2 tight end sets here, they're going to find mismatches. And these 2 guys are athletes. They're not just big bodied tight ends. They can move as well. So I hope that they lean into that and they really try to challenge some of these defenses as they've gotten smaller over the years, because this is not 2010's defenses. The defenses have gotten smaller to get faster. So I want to see them challenge teams over the middle here. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that here. And if it's Gardner Minshew under center, again, he's not going to lose you games. He's not necessarily going to win you games, but he's going to have you competing in those games. And that's something that you should feel good about as this search for who the quarterback of the future eventually ends up being. I don't know if it's Gardner Minshew. I don't know if it's Aiden O'Connell, but we'll see. But I'm really looking forward to what the Raiders are going to do this year. And I think you look at the back half of last season and the buy-in that they got once the McDaniel stuff was all done and put behind you, there is a lot to be excited about with the Raiders here. And then at number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it is what it is. You're coming off of what was a struggle of a season offensively, and you still won a Super Bowl. The drops, the miscommunications, the mistimings, just it was one of the clunkiest efforts I've seen from the Kansas City Chiefs since Patrick Mahomes has taken over as the quarterback there. There was some reworking that needed to be done to kind of open things back up for the offense here and really allow Andy Reid to do what he loves to do and not, I feel like, maybe be worried about what the outcome may be because of some of the issues that kept popping up last season. And I think that Kansas City went out and did that. And I would be hard-pressed to believe that this offense this season, even with the Marquise Brown injury kind of dealing a little bit of a blow to the offense right now, I would be hard-pressed to believe that this year's offense isn't better than last year's offense. And that's a scary thought considering last year's defense was really good, and I'm expecting the defense to at least be around the same. They may regress a little bit, but they're going to be relatively similar as far as effectiveness on that side of the football. So now you're talking an offense that's going to be better than last season. I would be shocked again if they're worse. I think they've got to progress. You bring in Marquise Brown. You go and get yourself the fastest wide receiver in the draft, who is not just a guy who's fast. He can run routes. You know, he did a lot while he was in Texas. His entire career, 2,700 yards, 26 touchdowns. He averaged 14 yards per reception while he was in college. So yeah, the Marquise Brown thing it sucks to have happen. He's going to be back hopefully within the next month and a half or so. But all I think that really does is just kind of speed up the progression you're going to have to put on Xavier Worthy and hope to get him further along than you were probably anticipating. But that, I think, kind of works out for you in the long run, because by the time Brown comes back, Worthy will have probably seen more than he would have if Brown was in the fold. I think Brown's going to find a really good connection with Mahomes, and you don't really have a lot to be worried about with Kansas City. On top of the Worthy selection in the draft, you went and got a left tackle in Kingsley Suamataia. Now, this is something to keep an eye on here. Second-round pick. He's going to be blocking for Mahomes' blindside if he winds up winning that job here. But from his track record while he was in college, only 2 sacks allowed over his last 2 seasons at BYU. Not too worried about him there. Obviously, though, being a rookie, that is something that you have to keep in the back of your mind. And then, of course, some depth selections as well. Tight end Jared Wiley, center Hunter Norzad. You have right guard CJ Hansen as well. I just simply have a hard time at this stage of my life, and with where the Kansas City Chiefs currently are within their kind of dynasty thing that they've got going on here, picking against them anymore, especially on the offensive side of things. You can say what you want about what the defense might look like this year, but I don't really think that any sane football fan is going to look at the Kansas City Chiefs this year and go, they might even be worse than what they were last year. Like, I don't really think that that's a realistic possibility here. Like, yeah, it's an unknown with Xavier Worthy. He's no sure bet, but his speed alone is something that defenses are going to have to respect. And once Marquise Brown is back in the fold, I would argue that Marquise Brown, and we haven't even talked about like Rashee Rice or anything like that. And, obviously with the legal stuff and whatever he's dealing with, is we'll see what happens there. But then you bring back like a guy like McCole Hardman, who had obviously great rapport with Patrick Mahomes as well. Like, there's just so much to like about this offense in Kansas City. The tight end room with Noah Gray and Travis Kelce. Now, while Noah Gray's not Travis Kelce, I do think he is an excellent number 2 tight end here, and I'm actually really excited to see what Jared Wiley is able to do and carve out for himself down the road. Like, you just have so much to like here, and I have no real issues with this offense. I'm curious to see how Kingsley Suamataia does at the left tackle spot. But, I mean, the rest of the offensive line is absolute nails. We'll see what happens with Jawan Taylor. And then, of course, the interior of the O-line, in my opinion, is one of the better ones in the NFL. I would say that if you're just going from, like, left guard to center to right guard, you could argue that they probably have, like, a top 3 to 5 group at worst, I would say, with Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, and Trey Smith on the interior. There is a lot to like about Kansas City here. So I'm not a Kansas City fan. I know I probably sound like one the way I'm talking about them, but there's a lot to be excited about here. So once Marquise Brown gets back and into the fold, I know some people are worried about that. I almost feel like it kind of benefits Xavier Worthy because it's going to force him to take on maybe a little bit more than he was anticipating early on. But I think the Chiefs will be fine with that. They were willing to trot out some guys last year that were basically dropping the football every other time it went their way, and they still kept bringing the football towards them. So I'm not too worried about it. I'm looking forward to seeing what Kansas City does this year, but I am anticipating a better offense than last year, and if that's going to be the case, I don't know how the hell anyone's going to stop them from three-peating, but I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But those are my rankings for the AFC West. Again, let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts, your opinions. Let me hear your rankings, but as always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.